Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On behalf of our families and communities here in Tamworth, I'd like to say Yama. Yama Day Gomeroi, Wallabag Niani, Wunungalawak, Yalamo Mari, Marumara, Ngali Down. Dilia Yanbali, Arino Marius Gaingal Gomeroi Ngamlanginda, Winalanginda, Winangalawa. And that's the language spoken by our families and our communities here in Tamworth, making sure that I acknowledge the country that I'm on, the land of the Gomeroi people, and pay my respects to elders both past and present that have cared and still care for this country. And quickly just want to point out and acknowledge and thank everybody for the support for Natal Quick that's recently just come through. I think the theme Get Up, Stand Up, Show Up was a great message for the community. It's great to see over 1,000 people march down Peel Street in unity in support of the theme. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sutherland.
Councillors, I'll ask everyone to stand. Pastor James Bell to
The meeting prayer, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Almighty God, we thank you for the men and women of Tamworth Regional Council as they serve and lead our city and region. We ask for courage and wisdom for righteous decisions that will nourish and prosper the region. We pray for decisions of integrity, justice and equity to be at the forefront of their deliberations. We thank you for their passion and dedication for our region. We ask you to encourage and empower them through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
councillors before I have the meeting tonight.
I would just like to pass my condolences on to Mr. Charles B. Chatwood's family, and I'd like to read a little bit of history of Mr. Charles Chatwood, who was previously one of the Tamworth City Council town clerks. Tonight I share the sad news of the death of a former Tamworth City Council town clerk, Mr. Charles E. Chatwood, late of Albion and formerly of the Sunshine Coast, Tararee, Tamworth, Gloucester, and Moree. He passed peacefully away on Tuesday the 5th of July 2022, aged 82, and was farewelled earlier today. He was farewelled in the celebration of his life at St Bridget's Catholic Church at Red Hill, Queensland. Mr. Chatwood was a much-loved father, father-in-law, pop and brother. He served the then Tamworth City Council for 9 years, from 1978 to 1987. He was appointed Deputy Town Clerk on August 78. He became Town Clerk in July 86, a position he held until October 1987, when he left to take up an appointment at the Greater Tararee City Council. One of his noticeable achievements was the upgrading works and major works to the Tamworth City Airport. They were officially opened in March 1986 by the then Governor-General Sir Ninian Stephen. He was described by former Mayor David John as dependable, supportive, imaginative, and could think through the consequence of an issue. Mr. Chatsworth had a long career in local government and was a fellow and life member of the Local Government Association and served on the board of that association. He was described by those who knew him as a great friend with a wicked sense of humour, a wonderful family man, proud of his children and their accomplishments, and so much appreciated by his grandkids. Father Charles Chatswood. Our condolences go to his family and his friend, and I'd ask if everybody here would stand for a moment of silence. It is. Thank you, councillors and residents. Councillors, I'll formally open the meeting and call for apologies and leaves of absence. And we have Councillor Brooks Southwell as an apology. She sought a leave of absence. Could I have someone to move that we accept that? Councillor Bett, seconded Councillor Sutherland. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Item 2 on the agenda is community consultation. Councillors, we have a number of speakers tonight. In fact, we have 5 speakers. And I would like to ask them at one at a time to come to to the podium and speak. Our first speaker tonight is Rebecca Brady, and I'd ask her to come forward, please. Rebecca, because this is a development matter, I'd ask if you have given any support or donations to councillors or senior staff that you've recognised, please.
Okay, lovely. No, I have not.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to address council this evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank the councillors who've made the time to come out to our property at Wimmera and hear our concerns. The original proposal that I'm speaking to is in relation to the feedlot development at Wimmera. So the original proposal was submitted back in December 2020, and this has been a really long, stressful and drawn-out process for all involved over the past 18 months. The feedlot's right next to the boundary of our property at Wimmera, and as most of you would have seen firsthand, we can clearly see the infrastructure of the current feedlot. The location means that if this DA is approved, the buffer zone will consume a considerable area of our property. The Wakefield Planning Report commissioned by Council acknowledges the significant impact of the buffer zone encroaching on our property. The report recognises that this is a significant impact on our workplace and potential future use. This is the most significant area of impact outside odour and water quality impacts. It is necessary for Council to form a view as to whether these impacts are such the proposal should not proceed. As discussed elsewhere, this is a balancing act, and essentially Council need to form a view as to whether amenity impacts and potential restrictions of future uses of land are a reasonable imposition on the adjoining owner. The requirements for separation distances mean that the adjoining owner would be restricted in terms of odour-sensitive uses, in particular the location of dwellings." End quote. As the adjoining owner, I say to you, this is not a reasonable imposition nor acceptable. Given this is supposedly a temporary facility, surely it would be a more reasonable condition or solution to ask the developer to relocate it to a suitable location. None of the conditions recommended by Council to facilitate approval of this DA address this issue or seek to mitigate this impact on us. In addition, the Wakefield Review clearly acknowledges that the concerns raised by residents in relation to environmental, social and amenity impacts are valid and very real issues which need close management. Again, I quote from the report, "Any approval needs to have confidence that amenity impacts can be closely managed, in particular the key amenity of odour. It is considered that the urban level is a more appropriate target than the rural level, which is more than 3 times higher." I do want to highlight the recommendation provided on page 96, which I believe is at the heart of the decision I have before you tonight to make. It states, "The ability to successfully manage impacts is a key view that Council needs to form in considering this application. Council needs to have confidence that any approval and the associated conditions and management and enforcement mechanisms would be effective. This developer has not followed procedures from the start and has failed to consult with community. Indeed, even after the refusal of consent last year, the applicant appears to have continued with developing the site with the addition of feed bunkers. Given that the most effective predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour, I ask, how can we, the residents of Wimmera, or the Council, trust or have confidence that the developer will appropriately monitor harmful impacts, self-regulate and report to Council? Nobody should be forced to become the buffer zone for somebody else's development. Councillors, I urge you to vote ethically by refusing this DA in this location. Thank you."
Thank you, Rebecca.
Second speaker tonight is
Jessica Pittman, I'd ask Jessica to come to the podium. Please state your name and the item you're addressing, and disclose if you've had any reportable political donations.
Hello, Jessica Pittman, and I have not had any donations given or received or otherwise. Good evening, Mayor, councillors, staff and my fellow community. My name is Jessica Pittman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this complex issue again. This DA does still not meet the requirements of the Tamworth Regional LEP for intensive agriculture. Odour is acknowledged to be a highly significant impact. We have proved that cold hair drainage does occur in our valley, and everyone will agree that a feedlot will come with odour. There only needs to be a potential for odour to impact landholders to be reason enough to reject this development. TRC's number one focus is water security. Pollution of surface and groundwater has still not been sufficiently addressed. Rainfall events are unpredictable, and having a feedlot situated over fractured rock will lead to leaching and contamination. Why is the council not working hard to protect our water? The sustainability of the site in the circumstances. It is obvious to us that this development is in an unsuitable location. Each of you that have taken the time to come and see us all agree it's just in the wrong spot. So why would you approve it? Why would you misrepresent the Loombra community? One of council's conditions for the applicant is to upgrade Pendine Road if they wish to use it for B-double access. To think that underpruning along our road, particularly in front of our driveway, is all that needs to happen is a gross understatement. That section of road is dangerous for regular traffic. We are concerned that to date the applicant has not been compliant and has not offered any consultation to the community. Why would we believe that our concerns will be taken seriously or addressed moving forward? How can we trust the applicant will appropriately monitor harmful impacts, self-regulate and report to TRC? Councillors, you've been elected to represent us. Please refer to the council handbook. What impacts will the decision have on the community and the environment in both the immediate and long term? In this instance, Loombra residents have nothing to gain from this feedlot. This proposed development is and always will be in an unsuitable location. An operational environmental management plan will not stop pollution to our air, water or soil. In conclusion, wouldn't it be a litigious precedent set if Tamworth Regional Council allow a major development to be built without approval and then approve it afterwards? Consider public interest. Do not facilitate the operation of this feedlot. Please refuse it.
Thank you, Jessica. The third speaker tonight is Matthew Pittman. I'd ask Matthew to state the name, the item you're speaking to, and disclose if any report a council employee.
Matthew Pittman, and I haven't received or given gifts about the Loombra feedlot. Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors and council staff. My name is Matthew Pittman. My family has resided on Pendine Road for 113 years, with 5 generations living and working just 650 metres from the proposed Loombra feedlot. The applicant had only owned Loma for just 7 months before the construction of the unapproved DA in question. There has been no consultation from the applicant or representation on their behalf to discuss the impacts that this development will have on our family, farm or community. The reports that the council staff, the reviewer and yourselves are basing these challenging decisions off are commissioned by the applicant. The Air Science report states that it relies on and presumes accurate the information or lack thereof made available to it to conduct its work. If this is not the case, the findings of the report may change. The applicant wouldn't pass on compromising information that may impede this development from going ahead. Expert reports commissioned by the developer clearly state they have been prepared for an appeal to the Land and Environment Court to push the developer's own agenda and to get his feedlot approved, with no regard for community or environment. Why haven't council commissioned their own reports? Given that Tamworth Regional Council is the consent authority, there is no room for error here. Our concerns for the future are valid and must be taken into consideration. Where will council be when our children are unwell from airborne pathogens and microorganisms produced at the feedlot and transmitted in the dust? When our groundwater is contaminated and no longer suitable for stock and domestic purposes, what happens then? Having no hydrology report surely puts council and all of us at risk. If there is a residual risk to our groundwater and waterways being polluted, why would councillors approve this feedlot? When the truck movements increase and our road deterioration increases, who puts the bill? Like many roads, ours already lacks regular attention. What guarantee do we have that the applicant will follow any conditions of approval? 12 months before producing an OEMP is too long for residents, complaints to be ignored and the environment to be destroyed. You approve this, you councillors are guaranteeing us that our farm, community and family will be unreasonably and detrimentally affected. What message will you be sending if you vote to allow this feedlot to go ahead at this location? Councillors are elected by the community to represent us. You are our voice. Please make it be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Council, we've got two other speakers on different items, but I'd call on David McKinnon to please come to the This is not a development matter, so you don't have to make any disclosures.
Oh, what a shame. Basically, I'm here to talk about the trading of a very large portion of land for a pipeline without any involvement of the community. And the community I represent feel that that's wrong. We should definitely have a community consultation when you're trading all of those acres of land for a pipeline, which is to be approved tonight or not, probably approved. And there has been no consultation at all. We feel left out. Unfortunately, more and more, the ratepayers are feeling left out, and yet they're paying for the people in this room. And it's very hard to understand that there's not more connection there and more representation from the actual council. There is no rush for this version of the land for the pipeline. There's no rush because we don't even know if the dam's going ahead. So why is the decision now being put forward when really who knows what's going to happen next year? The only long term for this dam is not, I should say, the dam is for short-term fix. We double Chaffey, it was a short-term fix. It lasted 2 years. We decided we'll build another one, a little dam this time, and it's not going to be a surprise when if it doesn't rain, it's going to be empty. The only answer for a long-term solution to water security in Tamworth is to actually have a recycling process in place. I might just add before I run out of 3 minutes, it surprises me also, partly being out of touch, if you did a vote on ratepayers in this town and said, should you give $20,000 to a corporation that makes 43 million last year and one of the biggest spinners for that particular effort was gambling. They now look like making another 20 million out of gambling in the States, and this is the NRL that we think needs $20,000 of our ratepayer money. I don't accept that.
Thank you, David. Last speaker tonight, if I could call on Graham Carter. Podium, please.
No, I'm not the developer, and no, I haven't had donations. But tonight I'm speaking in support with David about revisiting the need to vote on and make a decision about the Dungowan Dam pipeline and the Dungowan Dam proposal. This is only my second time speaking to council. The first time was to support a motion some 3 months ago calling on the New South Wales Government to release the business case for the Dungowan Dam, so that we can make an informed decision as ratepayers, residents of Tamworth, about the project. Now, unless I'm mistaken, or I've had my head well buried, no such information has been made available. The council has been ignored. We haven't been trusted. We haven't been considered. Our residents have been ignored. And yet again, we're now being asked to allow the council, or the council's making a decision about voting on whether we should cede to the state government Dungowan Dam, the old Dungowan Dam area. At the same time, we know that there's no contracts in place. There's no regulation, there's no legislation. It's just going to be all on a whiff, a dream. Hopefully the government will look after us. And in the council papers, I note that the new dam is owned by Water New South Wales and not considered a contributed asset, i.e. a gift to the people of Tamworth of substantial New South Wales taxpayer money that could be used to improve hospitals, roads, schools, make all our lives better, then the impact on the council's water customers would be so great that we would not have the capacity to pay for it. So unless the state government comes to the party and says, yeah, we'll give it to you, we're going to be committing the Tamworth ratepayers to something we can't afford. And I'm looking around the table, I would not like to be the person or persons as councillors who are saying, look, congratulations, in 2 years' time you won't have anything, you won't be able to afford water rates because we decided to go with a dream of the government. I think we need to be very cautious and take our time and wait till we get the full information before any decision is made. I note again also in the business papers it states that unless relating to the financial capacity of the pay for this proposal, unless there should be no additional impact to the customers, that is the residents of Tamworth, should the state cover the commercial return required of New South Wales water. It's clearly stating that we're moving down the path of a great risk for people of Tamworth. If the New South Wales state government pulls back that money, the residents, the taxpayers of Tamworth are going to have to pay for the ongoing cost of the dam. Water New South Wales is regulated by IPART, which is user pay. The dam itself is not going to create new water. It's only going to increase availability of water for existing water users. So that means the residents, water users in Tamworth are going to have to pay double for their water, at least. And so this decision, which we're going to ask the council to vote on tonight, is really opening up a lot of risk for us as ratepayers. And I think there's no need to make that decision tonight. We need to be calling for more information. We need to be out there and actually get some actual facts before us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Councillors, that concludes committee consultation. On to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Could I have somebody move that? Councillor Mears, second. Councillor Brew. Any questions in relation to those minutes? There being no questions, I'll put that accepted. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Councillors, we move on to item 4, disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest tonight? There being no disclosures of interest, I'll move on to item 5, mayoral minute. There is no mayoral minute. I'll move on to item 6, Country Mayors Association 6.1 rural health. Councillor Cates, would you like to move your report?
I will, thank you.
And second to that, Councillor Tickle, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Mayor for providing me with the opportunity to attend the Health Forum. Having worked in health for more than 40 years in a range of settings, I understand the challenges faced by health workers and patients every day. I'd also like to apologise for the length of my report. My reason for including so much detail is because I feel the issue is very important to our region, and sharing of the information provides an understanding of the enormity and the scale of the issue. The forum was a response to the earlier release of the report on health outcomes and access to health and hospital services in rural, regional and remote New South Wales. For anyone interested in understanding the background, I encourage you to read that report. The forum highlighted the problems associated with equitable access of healthcare and services, not just in our region, but across rural New South Wales. There is a critical shortage of health workers across the board, both in acute care and the community. There is a lack of palliative care services in rural areas. There is significant barriers to GPs moving to rural areas. And there is a lack of accountability, transparency, as well as the identification of realistic, measurable, achievable and quantifiable outcomes. Measuring the human cost is difficult. Unfortunately, there are too many people in our region that have personally experienced that cost and continue to do so every single day. Even since I actually attended the forum, I've continued to hear stories about these personal costs: financial, physical, mental and emotional. And even recently, hearing that agency nurses don't want to come to Tamworth because the hospital has a bad reputation. There was an acknowledgement that change is needed, but that it will take time and it won't be easy. But it needs to start soon and be flexible, multifaceted, to allow for the different needs of individual communities. I'm very much aware that health is not a jurisdiction of local government, that it belongs to state and federal governments. However, I believe that local government can play a role in attracting health workers to our region by providing attractive, appropriate and sought-after facilities. We can impact this, and we do each day in our community, and I'm proud to say that. But in addition, we need to ensure that health workers who come to our region for placements are welcomed and supported to gain a sense of belonging. It is people who provide healthcare, not buildings. Local government is well placed to communicate and be made aware of both capacity and need in our community. Could or should councils be assisting by consulting with our communities, large and small, as to what they feel is needed? Collectively, we have a role to play in that advocacy and developing local strategies. And by collaborating within our community and with other councils, we can be the joint power to impact. But I just urge everyone that we really are at a crisis point, that we need to be considering how we're going to be looking after those in our community who are not as well as others. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Coates. Could I ask the councillors, anybody wish to make any comments?
Thank you, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Coates, for attending and also for providing such a comprehensive report. For many years we have had this problem, but of course the problems that have been further exacerbated by many factors, one of which is COVID and no immigration, and 40% of our workers are not only on intensive agriculture in the abattoirs and fruit picking, they're also in our health services. And the fact we can't have international students, like our area in particular, created a lot of, attracted a lot of nurses studying their master's degree, and on weekends they would work in nursing homes. Through the week, wherever they could get a shift in a hospital, they would do it. So unfortunately we haven't had those staff in Australia now for 2 years, and the ones that have come here, a lot of them have stayed on because they do like it. And as Councillor Coates said, we must make people feel welcome by not only providing the services, but let our people know, our health workers and any new residents, let them know of the services and the support available within our community. We do have Big Sky relocations operating in our region. This could be a model on which to expand. Council has previously also had very good success with welcoming residents, having new residents' evenings, providing information. But we also have to be active in the space of attracting health workers and others to our region, and following that through, and particularly with health workers, we have to be able to provide them with accommodation, not just say, oh, come on and hopefully you'll find somewhere to live. And in the past, many small communities have done this. The councils have actually provided housing for their doctors, for their GPs, and they've happily stayed on for years. I do believe, and there is evidence to support, that a lot of young medical students would stay on in the country, but as Councillor Coates rightly points out in the forum notes, we do not have enough internship positions, and this is something that governments need to address. Rather than paying exorbitant costs to fly in and accommodate medical staff for a day or a week, they could be helping medical practitioners support an intern in their practice or at their local hospital. There is a lot that can be done, and we can't keep delaying this. I mean, for some reason, it just keeps slipping off the table. So thank you again, Councillor Coates, and there's some great points raised there that I believe at a local level. Medical conferences, another great way. We have had conferences here for medical purposes. We should continue that and continue to help bid for those conferences to expose people to our region. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillors, any further comments on Councillor Coates' report? Councillors, it's been moved and seconded that we receive and note the report. I'll put that recommendation. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Councillors, we'll now move on to item 7.1.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move section 7.1. I'd like to move it with some additional conditions and an alteration. The alteration being to 27J, M and N, and the additional condition number 38. If I have a seconder, I'll happily speak to those.
Second, Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, this has been a very traumatic experience for councillors and the Loomba community, and I'm sure for the proponent. And in our travels and in our discussions and in our learning more about this particular proposal, some of the key concerns of the community that came out landed heavily with us, and I personally felt there's an opportunity to make some of those conditions better. This particular proposal was unfortunately rejected. It's a legacy issue from the previous council. 4 of those councillors are on the current council, but unfortunately there's 5 new councillors. And for the 5 new councillors, we've struggled how we work through this. How do we identify and try and give support to the local community that is incredibly divided at the moment? And how do we give, if this particular proposal is going to get consent, how do we get the best possible outcomes for the community? And I believe strongly that the key issue that's been raised time and time again is odour. With Angus Witherby here with us this evening, who was the independent person who helped us walk through this process, his words were that odour is a major consideration and potentially the most impactful thing for residents. The odour units fall below 2 on the feedlot site itself, which is not seen as an impact. However, my main concern rests with the storing and stockpiling of manure and the subsequent spreading of that manure. Manure, if it's immature, and believe me, I know what immature manure is like, owning an intensive poultry farm and dealing with a lot of tonnes per week. If we can treat that manure to another level by way of composting, we're not mandating it, I'm asking that it's strongly recommended and that the operator takes on board the opportunity to further process that manure so that it's in a mature state, it has very little bioactivity and next to no odour if done properly, so that when it is spread on the applicable land that's meant to be applied to in the DA, that it won't have impacts on the neighbours. That's item J. The second M and N, we're just almost wordsmithing to ensure that these become must-dos rather than should-dos, to actually monitor prior to the commencement of operation both the baseline testing of soils and of the water. It's been relayed to us, the concerns of residents, that this particular feedlot, being below 1,000 head, escapes some of the requirements of what an environmental impact statement would require. So I think it's really important these things are mandated so that we can actually have measurement of consequential effects of the operation of the feedlot in the local area. And the last condition that I've asked, well, it was actually a recommendation from Angus to be added. And this is a trigger that I think a couple of the objectors spoke to this evening with regards to how's compliance met? How does the operation of this feedlot actually meet the things that it's meant to do? And the concern about self-reporting and self-assessment of how effective those conditions have been met. And it actually gives a fundamental foundation to council that if compliance is seen to be breached or there's regular compliance entries in the complaints document that needs to be kept by the proponent, that any technical studies that form part of those compliance activities will be borne by the cost as a cost to the operator. So it's not a cost to council to have to go research into trying to substantiate what these claims may be. Probably a little bit wordy, but I think what I've tried to do, and I'm sure my fellow councillors, given the opportunity to speak, will try and say we've listened to the community. Firstly, we've visited them. We've gone onto their places. We've actually gone right up to the adjoining boundary. Then as a group of councillors, we also went out to the proponent's property itself. We saw firsthand some of the things that have got this particular development to where it is, i.e. The substantial amount of work that's happened, the concerns that raised in the community's eyes, the notion of being temporary and fitting under the drought relief and situation there. The optics have been very poor, and we've been advised as councillors that we can't consider that in terms of this application for very real reasons. I think that the importance of the COEMP, the acronym for says, so the construction and operation environmental management plan to me is the key thing that's going to safeguard both the proponent and the community that are impacted with all those conditions, and it will provide with all those conditions an environment in which the community should not be affected to the point where we start to see a complaints register start to grow in number and the amenity of the current landholders reduced. Another concern that was raised with myself and with others was what comes under an alienation of land. There was a concern by residents that the proponent might be able to, at a future point of time, say, well, I've got this feedlot on one portion of 4 separate titles. That's my understanding, I could be wrong. But I do understand clearly that any change to the operation of that feedlot cannot happen, any change to the land holding cannot happen without a future consent by council, so that those land holdings need to stay in an aggregated form under this development condition that we're being proposed with tonight to alleviate those concerns. I think that the process that we have gone through as councillors has been incredibly well supported by Angus Witherby here tonight. Thank you, Angus. Angus has met with us on several occasions, once on Zoom whilst he was going through COVID. and it really gave us an insightful understanding to the process in terms of what is complying development, what is it that we as councillors need to consider in terms of it's very easy to get caught up into community angst in any particular development, but to be really clinical, to be able to assess everything in terms of its merit or otherwise in terms of a development proposal. And I thank you for that, Angus. I think that your help and support has been excellent, and certainly I know a great support to our directorships. I'd like to congratulate councillors, as I said, in the efforts that we've done to visit, see, try and understand and engage with the affected community. And I think the proponent is in the room tonight, and it's great to see you here. Those concerns are very real, and a fundamental direction from the COEMP is to have a plan of community engagement. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but that has to happen. And that has to happen in a very real way. It's councillors who have actually engaged with these people, not the proponent. And that's quite sad. I think that needs to change, and it needs to be a very sincere engagement, and one in which, if it is approved, that we can find something forward so the residents are not compromised to the extent that their concerns and in the way in which they've turned up here this evening. The screening is another concern that has, I think, been addressed, and there's a requirement now for 85% screening to be viable after 12 months, and I think that's on a continuing renewable basis. And for the proponent to even consider maybe screening some areas that maybe not mandated, so that other impactful visual aspects to particularly probably, the Brady and Pittman families might be considered rather than a minimum requirement, to actually try and exceed those requirements to ensure that the visual amenity is not too greatly disaffected. And I guess in closing, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to speak. This has been an incredibly personal, difficult struggle for me, and I'm sure for all of my fellow councillors. So I trust that the decision that we make tonight will be made in a very sincere and genuine way, and allow the community and the proponent to move forward. Thank you.
Any councillor with against the recommendation? Councillor Mears, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for the motion.
Against the motion, okay. You want to speak against the motion?
Thank you. What I'll first say is, and I don't need to disclose it because we have, but one of our previous speakers almost stole vice versa. I had no direct contact with Rebecca Brady. It'll sound interesting when I put my concerns up. I have, on a number of occasions, read through all the documents, all the recommendations, and reviewed all available information of both the proponent and objectors, and given all of this significant time, thought and additional research. I carefully considered the development application and concerns raised. I recognise the volume of work our staff have done, the research they have done and have considered, and commend them for the work and effort that has gone into this recommendation, or recommendations. One could argue that if all the apparent boxes are ticked, why would it come to council? Why can't it be rubber stamped, which in this case I'm glad it can't be. I'm of the belief in that it's because we as the councillors are elected to bring and apply more than just legislative requirements. We're elected as the face of the community and to represent both the proponents, objectors, who are people, as opposed to just simply facts and figures. I have noted their scope within the independent review by Wakefield Planning to inform views as to whether the impact of the DA meet reasonableness and or in the best interest of the proponent, objectors and the community as a whole. In the Wakefield report at 6.1.20, it states, or words to the effect of, it is not just good practice but deemed acknowledged that developers or developments are contain buffer zones within their own land. Attention has correctly been drawn by one of the objectors to the difference between a buffer zone and separation distances. A buffer zone should be contained within subject property to where the DA proposal is fixed. Therefore, consideration must be given to the application impinging on the neighbouring property without consent, the neighbour's property being wholly considered as a workplace, and attention also needs to be given to the impacts to all parts of that workplace and the persons conducting the business undertaking. For me, is in a development, does a proponent have the right to use an objector's property to meet the requirements of the development application, or impinge or impact on in any way on the right of the neighbouring property owner to initiate amenity impacts or potential restrictions on a neighbouring property without negotiation, consultation, without compensation nor agreement. Another concern that may slightly fall outside the development application is where both subject properties and neighbouring properties can or are classified or considered workplaces, if allowed to utilise a neighbouring businesses or workplace as a buffer zone for the subject property, who, as both parties would be classified as the PCBUs or the person conducting a business undertaking, who is then responsible for the adherence to work health and safety legislation where risk and risk factors are to be eliminated or minimised by effective controls, controlling the risk of harm. That would be a legal precedence that I haven't seen in all my years in the job that I do, that someone may be injured in someone else's buffer zone on somebody else's property. There's also a section, and I haven't noted it, where the Wakefield report states in regards to property evaluations. Emphasis is made that in the planning review is that courts, strictly speaking, do not use value as a planning value. Part of that's because the valuation process is complex. This is certainly does not imply that it is not to be considered. Having done research in this area with limited time or professional contact, there is little that I can find about values or value data in Australia. What discusses the impact of the impacts associated with the development do not necessarily reduce property values, but reduce sometimes significantly on the number of people who would pay that price. That may mean a longer wait for a person to sell their property. Now, my figures have been questioned, I would like, but still say similarly, if the price is not affected, but it takes an onus, let's just for saying 10 months to sell their property, longer than it would have been without the development, that property usually has a mortgage, overdraft or loans to maintain their business. How much more of an imposition is that delay in selling impacting on those people? I worked out to about, over a 10-month period, about $220,000 on a $500,000 loan, but those figures could be subject to discussion. There is, however, significant research about the value of properties where feedlots are built in the United States. On a positive note, the feedlot can provide a slight increase to property value, where the development creates a substantial number of new positions. this development, I don't think does. Alternatively, there is a significant amount of research by several companies, but one in particular, Midwest Environmental Advocates, indicating that since 1980, they've gathered a multitude of studies that have been conducted in the state. The construction of a feedlot, their size has not been articulated, so that part's speculative. If the property within 4.8 kilometres of a property that has a development application or puts a feedlot on it, they could lose up to 26% of the value of the neighbouring properties. And that's something council needs to consider. That would not only be a detrimental or significant impact on the residents that may suffer that kind of loss, and it would also diminish the amount of rates they have to pay to council if in fact they still wanted to pay them. Thank you.
Further comments, councillors?
Oh, yes, yeah, sorry. Through you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, approval of this proposed feedlot for me has been morally challenging, and in particular when considering the concept of social licence. Has acceptance been granted to the proponent, Gunnaganoo Pastoral, by the community? I would have to say no, and that would be partly due to the lack of advice at the onset, engagement and consultation along the way. From a legitimacy perspective, it could be said that the proponent was not seen to be playing the rules of the game from the beginning, and with the development of the temporary drought feedlot, and the temporary, as we're all aware, was questionable at that time. The low credibility and integrity associated with the proposal is based very much around this lack of legitimacy and lodging a DA initially, only doing so once the activity was reported to council. This may be seen as an indication of the proponent's capacity to provide open and truthful information to the community. The lack of legitimacy and credibility to date, lack of engagement and consultation with the community, it is difficult to see any level of trust developing within the community. So when I say that no acceptance or social licence has been granted by the community, it is based on the absence of these three factors. Consultation and engagement are dictated in the terms and conditions of the DA under condition 28. And as my fellow councillor said, in my opinion, the proponent needs to address this as a matter of importance, as it will take time and effort to build that trust. I have read and reread the original submissions and associated annexes with its conditions. I have visited the area with the opponents to see firsthand their concerns regarding the impact on their locale, and have also visited the property where the feedlot is proposed to operate. I have read the detail in the newest report submitted to council. I have asked many questions, and like Councillor Burke, I have conducted extensive research. Best practice is an integral part of any activity, from health to engineering, and can sit alongside cost-effective practice and should apply in all aspects of the proposed development, be it odour control, noise, water or soil degradation. There should be consideration given to consistency, the impact on amenity, meeting of statutory standards and availability of effective mitigation. Unfortunately, approval of this DA, which was initially submitted under change of use and comes before council again under a section 8.2 review of that determination, cannot consider only social licence. It must also consider legislation and law and whether or not it meets these. Having read the more than 37 conditions that have currently been applied to this DA, following on from an independent review, by the visits to the area, research and discussions, required evidence, provisions, monitoring and reporting, and, I will add, with the amendments proposed by Councillor Burke, I feel they all go a long way to ensure accountability and conditions are going to be met. I keep arriving at that place that although from a social licence perspective I've found it very hard to support the proposal, from a legal perspective it ticks the boxes for the relevant New South Wales Government requirements and current Tamworth Regional Council LEP 2010 RU1 conditions for feedlots under intensive agriculture. In closing, and with a heavy heart, I acknowledge there is no reason to not approve this DA. However, with those 37 conditions, it will go a long way to ensure that the concerns by the residents will be monitored, measured, managed and mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Coates. Speakers against it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I understand from the outset that this is certainly many of my fellow councillors have agonised over this, and I certainly have as well. And obviously, this is the second occasion that this has come before council, and it's obviously a legacy issue of the previous council. And I realise it's a tough gig for the new councillors to have to then pick up the pieces of this from the previous council. From the outset, we were also required to consider this application de novo, or from the start. As we all knew, and as do the residents understand, that it was, it's been completed. The project is virtually done. I fear approving this development may incentivise future developers to circumvent or ignore council processes because there is a financial benefit in doing so, and avoids the important scrutiny of public consultation that occurs prior to development approval and construction. And that's the important thing for adjoining impacted residents, that they get that opportunity to express their concerns and have those concerns heard and understood and put into action before development approval is provided. And hopefully, obviously, that forms part of the overall outcome of that development. That scrutiny generally ensures that projects, site and other important factors are considered before approvals and construction occurs, such as the concerns raised by adjoining landholders and some of those tonight. I still have concerns about this project as per section 5.183 of our LEP, in particular B, C, D, E and F of our LEP, plus concerns about buffers and receptor distances. Now, receptors are in fact people, residences, humans that live adjoining that development. During my time as a councillor, I've been contacted by impacted residents from across our LGA complaining about dust or contamination concerns of an adjoining intensive livestock facility. And then I've seen the sheer amount of time it takes up of council staff trying to mediate a better outcome. And I acknowledge fellow Councillor Burke in relation to section or condition of 38, which goes some way to address that. However, look, I still I was a no back in October 2021, and also with a heavy heart, it's a no from me tonight.
Mr Mayor, in accordance with the Tamworth Regional Local Environment Plan 2010, the subject land is located within the RU1 Primary Production Land Use Zone. The proposed feedlot is defined as intensive livestock agriculture, which is permissible within this zoning, as are piggeries, poultry farms and dairies. There have been many concerns raised, with the main ones being amenity and potential pollution impacts. Council has allocated significant resources to this development application, including the engagement of an independent consultant to further assess and address the concerns. I've taken all concerns seriously, as I know all my fellow councillors have, and the staff have, and I've examined the reports provided to me. I'm satisfied that all concerns have been fairly and adequately addressed In some cases, amendments to the original DA have been recommended, and we have the inclusion of another condition this evening. The feedlot is a legitimate DA permissible within the zoning. It is to be built and operated to industry standards. Council haven't made these standards up, they are industry standards. There are 37, potentially 38 conditions of consent, and there will be ongoing requirements such as environmental and management reports. Some residents of Pendine Road have asked if council would consider providing native trees to plant along Pendine Road to further improve the amenity. This is on council land, from the Durai-Dungo intersection along Pendine. I've discussed this with fellow councillors and appropriate staff, and we all agree to provide tube stock to the residents to plant along Pendine Road.
Thanks, councillor. Further councillors to speak again? Councillor Sutherland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I would like to back up the comments made to thank the staff, council staff, and independent review, and being able to, as a new councillor, get us up to speed on the process with DA and to get that kind of independent view over the top. I still have serious concerns about meeting the LEP under section 5.18. Also combined with, as Councillor Coates mentioned, the lack of social licence. You know, the likeliness of social impact of the development, I think, is a risk that's substantial. And also want to acknowledge and appreciate the amendments made by Councillor Burt. 38 conditions to try to mitigate risk and making a strong effort to try to tighten that up. For me, when does risk become too high? And for me, it's something that, as councillors, the point was made earlier, being the voice of the community, and for me, the risk outweighs the benefit, and I also will not be supporting the recommendation.
Councillors, further councillors.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. This is the second time this has came before us, and the first time I went against the recommendation, but we've now got an independent consultant to go through it in absolute detail, and was looking at a blank canvas sheet without taking any other considerations. I won't speak very long on this subject because all my fellow councillors have covered issues that I feel deeply with, including the people who speak against it. But certainly the issue that we have there is that it's a complying development and it meets those legislative requirements. The thing that I am particularly disappointed with is that the proponent hasn't consulted, to my mind, sufficiently with the residents, because in my history in local government I've seen many developments where lack of consultation really has been to the detriment, but where good consultation and working together as a community will make a difference, it really will. But in this particular case, we have now a process of compliance registration and complaints register, and that will need to be implemented by council to the nth degree, because this has to be the option for the community to actually have their say. And believe you me, I will be watching that very closely. There's a 24-hour turnaround for any complaints and issues, and it needs to be implemented. The other thing that I see, and having quite a bit of experience in the national recognition of NATA, which is a national testing authority right across Australia, and people have to be accredited to do certain works to a NATA standard. And it's a national body, and going outside that you lose your accreditation. The National Livestock Accreditation is the same sort of organisation. It has mechanisms in it that will really hold this person, the development, to account. And we need to make sure that the auditing process is rigorous and goes through it, and we follow up on that. Too many times in local government I've seen that we have development conditions put on and these are breached. This is a time that this is not to be breached. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, councillor Beth. Before I ask councillor Burke to close, I'll just make a comment. This is probably the first item of business that's come before this new council that's really created some, I guess, a lot of work in terms of each council having to go out and do some research. It's created a lot of work for our staff, with councillors having to go and talk to our staff and get advice and seek advice, and also with Angus having to help our councillors understand what we're facing. And I thank the councillors for the work that they've put in. I think you've all done a lot of work to try and come to the conclusion that you've come to, wherever it might sit. And I too would like to thank the staff. There's been a lot of work done there, and I thank the community for taking the time to talk to us and give us their points of view. I think there's so much in this in this world that we have to look at when we look at I guess developments like this. And we've looked at so many before that have come before us over the last period of time that I've been in local government, and many of them have communities. And of course, there's always the outcome will be welcomed by some and not by others. And it's a real challenge for councillors who are elected by the people to firstly make decisions that are lawful, and secondly make decisions that support what the community actually needs. So, councillor Burke, if you close the debate, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and to my fellow councillors. In closing, I will introduce something that I believe that the proponent, if this is voted up tonight, should do by way of a goodwill gesture, and that is the assessment in section 17 of the money to be paid to council for the consideration of development only considers the stuff that would happen from an approval forward. So that means that there's been a lot of construction done that isn't subject to the 0.05% levy. And I think it would be something in terms of a goodwill gesture both to council and community that the proponent, if this is successful tonight, should consider. But look, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much to my fellow councillors. Thank you to the community. It's been pretty tough. And, you know, tonight we need to do the appropriate thing and make a decision.
Councillors, being an application, I'll ask for a recommendation. Please put your hand. Say aye. Those against? Councillors, the recommendation is carried. For those in the room that have come to hear that item discussed, they're quite welcome to leave it. If they'd like to stay, they're quite welcome to stay.
We don't care about the community in this council. Sorry. Give a fuck about it. Thank you very much.
Councillors, we'll move on. We'll move on to item 2. Councillor Betts. Councillor Page.
Yes, I do. I've just got to find where I'm up to, Mr Mayor. I'm sorry. Through you, Mr Mayor, I welcome the use of Milroy language for flora and fauna in local roads and streets. I see it as part of our becoming a community that acknowledges the local First Nations people. It would be very narrow-minded and exclusive not to consider names based around our local Gomeroi language. And yes, the pronunciation may be challenging, but we need to face the challenge in a positive manner. Every day we're faced with language challenges, and I think this is just another. So I totally support the item. Thank you.
Any councillor wish to speak against the recommendation? Any councillors wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I also support this, and this is actually only continuing on for names, street names and place names that we have already done in Tamworth already. So there's no change here, and look, I'm looking forward to being able to pronounce some of these over time. I'm sure that even visitors might mess it up as they talk about the news and place names we already have. But I think it's a great step to incorporate place names, from local Gomeroi language.
Any further councillors wish to speak for? Councillor Baird?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Look, totally support this. This is sort of not really even breaking new ground in some areas, because if you have a look, and I was working with the local lands councillors when we were part of the committee, consultative committee before, and the number of place names around the Tamworth region is in first language is significant. This is just an extension of that. And as for the pronunciation, how many people come to Tamworth and you ask where Goonoo Goonoo is? And this is no different, and I'm just welcome it. I have spoken with one of the elders that was involved in this, Uncle Nev Sampson, and he did a marvellous job, and he really had a spiritual meaning behind each one of those. So it has more significance than just a random name that was picked out of a dictionary. It was really done for a spiritual reason, and I really support this. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Further comment, councillors? Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak in support of it as well, but I would just like to consider, this is the second time that names from the Global have come before this current council, and I wonder if it would be possible to actually have the phonetics, in other words, the way that the word sounds, and I don't know whether that means the actual name on the street plus the phonetic name for a transition period or for a customisation period, as you pointed out, Councillor Betts, till we learn the name. It might be easy for my fellow councillor Sutherland to pronounce them, but I know for a lot of us it's not going to be easy until it actually becomes imprinted. And if we can get it right at the start, I think that would be great.
Mr Mayor, yeah, fully support the recommendation and hear what Councillor Burke is saying, and it might be an option to have some signage on the way in, to have a larger sign with all of the street names and images of what they're connected to, so Bundown having a Grey Kangaroo there next to it. The importance of incorporating our local language is a huge gesture and a gesture that's been happening for quite some time now across Tamworth Regional Council. Be really active in the space and making sure that language that was once illegal to be spoken on this country is now being endorsed as something that's a normal practice. It's a great message that we're putting forward to community, supporting our First Nations people. And just to point out that these words, I understand that there's some conversation around some other street names and language from a foreign language from a foreign country about foreign things. Pointing out that this is language, the original language of these things, on the country that it belongs to. And so again, making sure that we're really proactive in that space, I think is an important, powerful gesture, and any support that I can give, I definitely will. And also just want to make point and thank the staff for the consultation work that went through. Graham's not here. I know that Graham McKenzie was a big part of that process, speaking with Aboriginal elders and Aboriginal community members, but also with our Yalawonga Guy Golowa, the language group that's community driven, to be able to provide some input there. So the consultation's been great, really supported by myself and the community.
Comment, councillors? Councillor Mead.
Yeah, just like to support the motion as well, and just thank the council for moving this way. Now that we're not going to potentially be in jail for speaking the language, I would like to call on probably Councillor Sutherland, if he has the time in his busy schedule, that at some point further down the track, if together having a lemonade or two, that we could interact and have you initially teach us the words correctly, and or if we could do a workshop and bring the language group into council to give us a bit of a workshop on the traditional language of this region.
Yes, my comment.
Just a quick comment, councillor, based on the discussion. Councillor Burke, we did consider the phonetic spelling on the sign. We thought it would make them a bit busy, which is why we decided to include the image of the animal. Councillor Sutherland, when we had our elder Neville Sampson with us, made the commentary that the important part of this is around the education campaign that goes with this, and we'd like to not do it just on the basis that it's easy for somebody to read the street name. We want to actually focus on the fact that we have used Indigenous language in naming these streets, and we want to do it as a much larger education campaign so people understand the way that the words are structured and so on, and why they are structured a particular way, which will make them easier to understand other words when they come across them in the future that are spelt in the same way, and those pronunciations will become almost second nature. So I'm still willing to consider that, but we did think that potentially that it would make this very busy. We had two lots of words and so on, so it was going to just be the native word and then the image and then an education campaign to make sure that people, I think it's a bit of fun too when people come and say Gunu Gunu, and you have to educate them in what it actually is. So I think it's something we can be proud of.
Further comment, councillors? I'll put that recommendation. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Councillors, we'll move on to item 8, which is infrastructure and services, 8.1. Could I have somebody move 8.1, please? Local Traffic Committee. Councillor Betts, seconded Councillor Burke. Councillor Betts, do you wish to speak to that?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, these issues get reviewed very extensively by the Traffic Committee, which has representatives of council, police, Transport New South Wales and the local members' office. And yeah, pretty much everything's been discussed quite rigorously, but one of the things that I would just like to reaffirm is that the cycling event that will go into the Loomba area will be extensively advertised and signposted, because there was confusion last time that the event took place, that there was sort of lack of signposting and communication, but that has been discussed quite thoroughly at the committee, and we'll ensure that that doesn't happen again.
Councillors, anyone wish to speak against? Councillor speak for. Councillor Burke.
Thanks again, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to point out there is a retrospective approval in point 4. The date of the 8th of July for the NAIDOC has already passed, just so that people in the future reading this document understand that that's already a recommendation that was made. To just, I think, rubber stamping it here at tonight's meeting, or is there another way in which we should interpret it?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Councillors endorsed makes some of these decisions, but council accepts the minutes from the committee and just endorses the minutes as what actually occurred. So that meeting did occur and that approval was given by the Traffic Committee in advance of the event.
Thanks. Any further comments, councillors? There being no further comments, councillor, I'll put item 8.1. Those in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those against? Carried. Councillor, we move on to item 8.2, Dungan Dam Pipeline ownership and operation. The second, please. Councillor Burke moved, seconded Councillor Tickle. Councillor Burke, you wish to speak to that?
Look, I do, Mr Mayor, and in alignment with the fact that we had a community do presentations here tonight, I heard communities say, if I'm right, that the cost of water from the New Dungan Dam would be significantly more and most likely unaffordable. Clearly, this motion does not say that. This motion says absolutely clearly that we are not going to own the dam, that the ownership of the pipeline is transferred to council at nothing more than nil, and that we will not accept, because council is the only customer, in addition to the ones along the pipeline, will not accept an outcome from my part that is anyway, it's been point C. The second thing I want to mention is that there's and this doesn't get brought up in community enough, is the cost of the no-build case. And that's probably going to be highly likely now. We understand that the federal government, with the change in minister, there's a lot of confusion as to what that new minister will do. The state government funds were committed. But if we don't have the benefit of having this new dam, we have to be able to find a way in which we have to comply with making the safety upgrade to the existing Dungown Dam that we own, and also the pipeline from the current new pipeline that's going up to the junction of the Chaffey Dam emergency pipeline that's put in. We also have to fund that. And I just would reiterate, so the community gets this, that the cost of no build to the Tamworth people is a very real and large amount. So if we're going to say that the water rates are going to go up when it's not right, as a result of Chaffey, but not acknowledge that we've got the costs of doing the safety upgrade and the pipeline, I think that we're fooling ourselves, and we need to have a reality check on that. Thank you.
Councillors?
Mr Mayor, yeah, look, I have always been concerned, till recently about, I guess, the principles of full cost of recovery applying to a new Dungowan Dam. I'm confident that that won't be the case. I mean, I guess we can't imagine what a future government in New South Wales might do in terms of its recommendations to IPART or suggestions to IPART in relation to water charges for us. But obviously, if it was based on the actual construction cost of a new Dungowan Dam, they would be high. But I'm sincerely hoping that that will never be the case. But in relation to some of the points that Councillor Burke raised, in the federal government, I mean, we haven't yet got any clarification from them about the future of the proposal from their perspective. I understand state government's still working towards construction of a new dam until they obviously hear otherwise from the Commonwealth Government. But I'm wondering, and not to preempt a decision of the Commonwealth Government, but I wonder whether we need to start the ball rolling on a discussion with the state government about those important issues of safety upgrade and the cost of the dilapidated pipeline from the current Dungowan Dam should a new Dungowan Dam not proceed. And I wonder also whether we need to enlarge the conversation to the alternative government of New South Wales as well, since we're probably a little less than 9 months to a state election, just to be, I guess, to highlight to them the importance of water infrastructure to our region, and in terms of things like the forward osmosis, reverse osmosis water purification, which is vital to us here as well and goes a long way. I realise this doesn't form part of this recommendation, but it goes a long way to future-proofing our region when we face the next drought.
Further comments, councillors? Councillor Betts.
Most of the issues that I was going to raise have already been raised, but one of the reasons for this report is to ensure that council really puts the pressure on to get ownership of that pipeline. The ownership of that pipeline is critical to this community at nil cost, as Councillor Burke said, but council needs to have ownership of that because it's shown that we have had multiple connections to this pipeline, the current old Dungowan pipeline, and the issue of that access has created many, many legal problems. The other issue is that when there is any breakages and that, if council owns and operates it and manages it, it is done in a very responsive time. We have seen that the potential when the drought management issues were looked at and the pipeline was temporarily managed by other areas, there was absolute confusion, and we really need to know that we own that pipeline at nil cost so that we can control the water. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Further comments, councillor? There being no further comments, I'll put the recommendations. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Councillors, we move from item 8.2 to Item 9 and 9.1, sponsorship of the National Rugby League Premier Game. Move councillor Betts, Tickle. Councillor Betts, can you speak to that?
Yeah, just briefly, Mr Mayor. Look, this comes up on a regular basis with council putting funding into projects. This is just another one. We some time ago had a staff member that worked here and really put the value the value to the community for any event that we had, and the cost of a $20,000 input towards an event. The result that we get is, in this particular case, I'm not sure of the exact figures, but it could be in excess of $500,000 to $750,000. Well, that's dependent on how you look at it, but yeah, we can go $4 million. But our 20,000, there's a bit of an extrapolation there, but it is a significant benefit to the community. It's not the $20,000. And as we said in previous discussions, previous times that these things have been put up, this same event, and the NRL event, in other areas, Bathurst, I think it's in excess of $300,000 to actually get the same event here. This community organisation is putting it in, and to get $20,000 worth of advertising, which you do, you get the sign of Tamworth, and it goes right across the nation. We are getting extremely good value as a marketing perspective for Tamworth, so totally support it, Mr Mayor.
Councillor wish to speak again? Councillor speak for.
Look, again, because it was spoken to tonight, Mr Mayor, I think it's important to clarify that this is not money paid to the NRL. This is money paid to the Tamworth Leagues Club, so that they can actually get support to host the event. I think it's a wonderful thing for Tamworth. If you like it or loathe it, to have an event of the standard of an NRL match in Tamworth, and as the GM has said, and I have heard on many occasions, the players who play on that surface say that it's probably the best surface that they play on in Australia. Once people start to realise that, I think that this could grow even further. To me, it's an underutilised asset over there. It was such a wonderful thing when we were able to host the Warriors through COVID, and I don't think they'll ever forget the gesture that was paid to the Warriors team by this community. And I'd really like the support of council to continue that sponsorship on an ongoing basis.
Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Councillor, if we move on to item 10, community services, we have 10.1, loan of artwork from the Visual Art Collection. Someone, Councillor Coates to move, seconded Councillor Hughes. Councillor Coates, you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to make a comment that I think that being able to share the artwork that Tamworth actually owns, and in particular this one for Chad Morgan, it's another opportunity to promote Tamworth, whether you like country music or not. I think most people have heard of Chad Morgan and can then relate him to our area. I think the fact that there is no risk, no financial issue associated or implications associated with us loaning it, I think that it should, I totally support it.
Councillors, any councillor wish to speak against the recommendation? Councillors for? Councillor Tickle, did you want to speak to it? No? Okay, councillor, I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Councillors, we move on to item 11, and we have to be considered in closed council. Councillors, that brings us to a conclusion to tonight's meeting, and I thank you all for your attendance.